What's up everyone, Adam from Cape Crawlers, and today we're going to do an update on the Traxxas TRX4M Bronco build. Welcome back to the channel everybody. Today we're going to take a quick look at the Traxxas TRX4M Bronco build that I'm working on. I get a lot of questions about this thing and I figured we'd do a quick update on where this thing is right now, what I've done to it, why I did those things, what are the key takeaways, and then kind of what my direction is for this build going forward. This build has been a lot of fun. I've been very fortunate to receive a lot of prototype parts and home printed, 3D printed parts from subscribers and folks on Instagram. So for those of you who have contributed to this build, I really appreciate it. This has kind of been, the Bronco is evolving so quickly, which is why it's taken me a little longer to get this video out than I initially wanted, because it changes all the time, because I'm really fortunate to get these extra parts to try out. So thank you to everyone who's contributed. But we'll jump in and we'll take a look at this thing as it sits now. I get a lot of questions about it because it's transformed quite a bit from stock condition. And it's pretty capable right now, and it's just working really well. So why don't we dive into this thing? We'll take a look at the exterior first, because a lot of these things are on the exterior, kind of on the aesthetic side. So we'll take a look at that first, and then we'll take the body off and we'll look a little closer at what I've done to the chassis and the body itself too. I've done some body modifications. So let's jump in and take a look at this thing. So let's start this off with the exterior. So probably the first thing you notice is the wheels and tires. So I'm still running the Endura all brass beadlock wheels that I got initially. These things are awesome, super heavy, about 49 grams a piece. Still running these wheels, I really love them. I think they look great on the Bronco, really complements the black on black and just works really well with this build. Now I've switched the tires around quite a bit. I've run the Little Guy Racing Parts Trail Kings, I've run the Grippers, and I've come back to the Endura 64mm rock terrains. I really just love how they look on this build. I think the big square-edged beefy tires just fit the Bronco really well. So after switching things around and trying a bunch of different tires, I really have come back to these because these are my favorite tires on this build so far. I'm running stock foams in them. The wheels are vented, so I do get some extra conformity and some extra squish there, but running stock foams, which I think are stiff. It's heavy as it is, but I still think I could benefit from a softer foam. Now I have tried the Crawler Innovation medium compound foam in these tires, and it's still too soft. So I may try a firm foam, but what I will most likely end up doing is throwing in a set of Flubber Stuffers slime balls in here. So I think that's going to be the combo that I'm going to go with, and probably the best bet for these tires in the way it is now. In the back, a couple of things to note in the back here. So Traxxas, if you take the spare tire off of this, there's a hex on the back that you can fit any 7mm wheel on here, which I love it. So happy to see that. So to access the screw that you need to take off the fake spare, you have to cut a little hole out of the center, because the Bronco sticker is right on the back covering that screw. And it's the same thing with the Defender. So you see it's got the sticker. My son has also layered stickers on here, but it has the sticker on top of the fake spare tire. You have to cut a little hole out in the middle, and then you can get to the screw to pop this thing off, and then there's a hex right behind it. So what I did, since I had upgraded the wheels and tires, I just threw one of the stock tire and wheels on there, and I think it looks pretty good. It's not quite the same scale as these other big tires, but I think it looks really good, and it's not super gigantic on the back, so I think it gives it a really good look. Does hurt me on uphill performance, gotta say. It does add a fair amount of weight to the back, but I like the looks, so it's a trade-off. I'm gonna get some more weight in the front to balance that out. Another thing we're running here is a high clearance bumper. So this is from Joe RC's on Instagram, hooked me up with these. I typically don't like the raw 3D printed materials, but I really like this bumper because it's just so small. It's very, very tiny. It's nice and clean, fits right up in there, and gives me the clearance that I need for these tires, and helps me with my departure and approach angles here with this kind of real stubby, almost invisible rear bumper. In the front, what I did was cut the front bumper. So I trimmed it. I wanted to maintain the look of the stock front bumper because I like it with the lights in it and things like that. But I did need to trim it because it just was sticking out too far and the tires were getting hung up on it. So I just took a Dremel and I just kind of sliced off the ends and kind of shaped the inside here to give me room for these big tires and the clearance. Still rubs a little bit. These tires are just so huge, but it's minimal and it doesn't get hung up or snagged to the degree of causing issues. It does make some noise every now and then, but it's not terrible. What else I have done is I have cut the fender flares off. If you can see, now that it's got big tires on it, they were rubbing significantly with the stock fender flares on here, so we cut those off. And how I did that was, let me take this body off so you can see it. We'll do a closer look. I left the clips attached in the front and back because I love that clipless body design. I think that's amazing and I'm so grateful for that. Traxxas, I love you for that. But I needed to trim off quite a bit in here. So because this is all kind of one piece, the fenders all run together here, and it includes your braces across, and it also holds in your windows here. So I needed to salvage some pieces. I just left these little stubs here to hold the windows in. I left this brace here to hold the kind of this trim piece with the mirrors on the front. I left all that in, but I cut everything else off. So the fenders are completely gone, removed from the front clips here, and the same with the rear. I wanted to keep the rock sliders, so I just cut the rock sliders off and then I just glued them back on. They are notched, so they slide right on to the hard body. So I just put some glue in there and just stuck them back on. So I think it fits really well. Still needs a little bit of cleanup here, but they fit on there really well. And from the exterior, since I didn't have to cut the body itself, it just gives it a nice, clean factory look with no fenders. So I like that a lot. I was, again, just like my SCX24 Bronco, I was really scared to mess with the body. But again, Traxxas sells these things a complete extra body for $45. So I figured the worst that could happen was I'd be out $50 and have to get a new body. So I wasn't sweating it too bad. But I'm happy with how it came out. It worked really well. Other things from an appearance standpoint, it's not really a huge modification, and I think I had this on here pretty early, but it's got the Pro Scale light kit on it. That's more noticeable from the back because it does come with these really sharp looking taillights in the back here, those clear taillights with LEDs back there. So the Pro Scale light kit just adds a really nice touch to the Bronco specifically with these lights. So let's jump into the chassis and suspension a little bit, and we'll take a look at the other things I've done here. So the exterior stuff is cool to look at, but let's look at the mechanics underneath here. Let's see what I've done with the chassis and the suspension. This is what I get asked about the most, is what I've done with the suspension on this thing, because it's able to flex pretty significantly now. Much, much, much more than it did stock. So let me show you what I've done to this thing from a suspension standpoint. For shocks, it's running the 58mm Power Hobby double barrel SCX24 shocks. Now I've retrofit these on here. It is not super duper clean, I gotta say. How I did it was I just removed the pivot hardware from the Power Hobby shocks and I just run the Traxxas bolts directly through it. And I leave the bolts backed out just enough so that those shocks can pivot on the bolts themselves. Now the action is really smooth. They don't bind. It works really well. I'm super happy with this setup, even though it was kind of like a makeshift setup initially, but it actually turned out pretty well. So it's got these 58mm shocks. I did try the 54s, but those were not long enough to make any significant noticeable difference. So what I ended up doing was doing the 58s. Thankfully they came out kind of right around the same time I was tinkering with this. They're probably just a couple 2 or 3 millimeters longer than the stock Traxxas shocks, but that's enough to give you some significant clearance. And what I like is that I can run these things with one short spring in them, and the thing sits bottomed out. It's got that nice low stance to it, and I like that a lot. It's very much like my SCX24s. From a spring setup, what I had to do was run the one soft spring in the front. Now these shocks come with 2 springs, so you remove the inner collar and just run 1 spring on here is what I've done. So I've got the soft one in the front and I've got the medium one in the back, only because I was finding that it was really raked towards the back and I didn't like it, so I put the heavier duty spring in the back to level it out. It still slopes to the back a little bit, but not nearly as bad. So the only regret I have is to make this work with the frame mounting. What I had to do was drill out these holes in the frame, because they originally were made to work with much smaller bolts, but those would not hold the shocks. So in order to use a large enough bolt to hold the shock, I had to drill out the frame, which in hindsight was kind of a bummer, because if I just waited a little bit longer, I would have had like this Joe RC's shock mounting and ESC tray with a lot of options for my shock placement. But it is what it is. I kind of forged ahead and did this anyway, so there's no turning back now. But what this did allow me to do in the front was completely remove the shock towers. Now the design of the TRX4M is pretty, I don't want to say flawed, but it's not articulation friendly. How about that? So when you get a large degree of articulation, you would hit those shock towers on your servo right there. So it was really limiting articulation from the factory. So removing those towers allows you to articulate much more before that servo becomes a problem, which it still is. It still hits the frame rails, but when the suspension drops all the way, that servo is actually able to tuck under the frame rail, and I'm getting full drop from the suspension there. See, there it goes. But it's not, it's a little clunky. You know, see if you'll see it click there when it goes. So it's a little better on that side. So that frame rail position and the servo position is still a problem, although I've managed to mitigate it quite a bit by removing the shock towers. So I'm happy with that setup. I was able to gain a lot of articulation with that setup there. In the back, left the ESC tray and the shock mounts, and again just did the same thing, just bored out 1 holes on each side of the frame to mount my shock there, and that's my shock setup. Underneath it here, I'm running these metal high clearance links from RC Addictions 19 from Instagram. Hooked me up with these links. I really like them. I'm usually not a fan of the gold on an all black build, but I think these gold, and they're really rugged looking too, these thick metal gold links work really well with the gold brass on the wheels. So it all kind of comes together pretty well, and I like how it looks. They perform excellent. They move really smooth. I really like the links a lot, and that high clearance feature there works great. Other than that, I haven't done much. I'm running the crawler gear set in here, which I really like. You know, that really, it's really slow, I gotta say, but I just really like that gear set. And I have some more stuff coming to upgrade the drivetrain, and I'm kind of on the fence about it because I really like these low gears and I like the setup now, but we'll see. Progress is going to take us in one way or the other. We're either going to go forward or backwards with what's coming. So don't get too used to this motor and transmission setup. So how does all this come together? How does this thing perform? It works really well, I gotta say. It's pretty impressive. The capabilities are far above stock, although I have really hurt myself from a vertical climbing standpoint, just like I get into with the SCX24s. I get that unloading of the front on steep climbs, you know, the spare tire on the back and the shock positioning. All that doesn't help with vertical climbing. So I've got a bunch of brass on order from Endura and Triel to hopefully load up the front end to keep that thing planted. And I'm going to keep messing with the front suspension. I might see if I can get that Joe RC's shock mounts in there and kind of tweak the front suspension a little bit to see if I can keep that front end down. Don't feel like I need limiting straps yet because I don't have any drive shaft disconnection issues. It's just optimizing the suspension placement so that I can get my uphilling in a way that works but still keeps me happy from an articulation standpoint. With the added weight and everything on it from the wheels, I don't feel I have any issues with the motor. Although I do have a full FuryTech system coming. Full disclosure, we're going to overhaul this thing and we're going to do the full brushless conversion on it, which, like I said, I'm kind of on the fence about, but I am going to forge ahead with, only because I really like the low speed gears in it and how this thing is working right now. But in the name of progress, we're going to try it out and we're going to see how the FuryTech system works in this. So that'll be in a future build, but that is on its way right now. So overall, I'm really happy with the mods. You know, it's a never-ending game. We're going to keep tweaking it. We're going to keep pursuing the optimal setup for rounded performance and tons of articulation, because that's just what we do, you know? So that's what we're chasing. I hope this helped you out. I hope this answered some of your questions. I'll put the links in the description down below for the products that we used. And again, shout out to everybody who's helped me along the way with this build. It's been so awesome to interact with you all and to share this build with you from an insider's perspective. You know, getting to try new parts that you guys are printing, and a bunch of innovators out there, man. I'm telling you, this community is amazing, what you guys are able to come up with so quick. And I'm really grateful that I'm able to try these things out and feature them when I get an opportunity. So thank you all. So that's going to wrap it up. I'm going to stop there. You know, let me know your thoughts down below, what you think of the Bronco and what you've been doing to your TRX4M if you've got one. Definitely want to hear from you guys. Stay tuned as we're going to continue to build this thing out. Phase 3 of this build will be coming probably in a couple weeks. We'll have some big changes then. The aftermarket is really heating up for this thing. So as the upgrades come out, I'm going to keep buying them. We're going to keep upgrading this thing, and we're going to see where it takes us. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so, and I'll see you in the next video.